Guy every time the panel kind of, loses its way. So without further ado, let's begin this very, very interesting session. It's called The Blurring Lines Between India and Bharat. But before I actually get into, this conversation and, look at the layers of this topic, I want to first ask my panelists to, take center stage, take the spotlight for about 2 minutes or so, and tell me whether you agree with the fact that today India and Bharat are no more two countries as was looked at for decades now. Are they one big universe? Do you think there are actually blurring lines? And to kickstart this, I would like to invite Santosh Desai to give me his 2 bits on whether he thinks the lines are blurring or not.
Yes, I certainly think that, this distinction is increasingly becoming irrelevant today. I think, if you go back in time and ask yourselves, if you ask ourselves as to what was the reason that we kind of characterized in India in such a crude binary. I mean, if you think about the complexity of India, to try and sum up this complexity by just reducing it to the simple binary of India and Bharat, is really, it is really simplistic, and it always was simplistic. But I think today, particularly, if you think about this, the mental model is a very linear model. The big cities are strong signals, and as you move away from the big city, the signals become weaker. So, everything becomes weaker. And that's the kind of the idea of receptivity to consumption, the ability to in a sense, make sense of more evolved concepts. So we imagine India as this, as something that moves, and then starts fading, the signal starts fading in a kind of linear sense as we move from the center to the periphery. I think so much has changed that forces us to kind of rethink this model that we implicitly have in our minds. If you think about, our earlier model of development was roads and electricity. And so therefore, roads do not reach the interiors with the same kind of a intensity, and therefore this sense that, as you move into smaller towns, somehow things fade. Today, our models are all, if anything, circular. The internet reaches everywhere, television increasingly reaches everywhere. So all that, the reason why we thought of, India and Bharat in those terms, those reasons have got dismantled. I think it's much, more, in a sense, meaningful today to think about India as circles of interests. And circles of interest can cut across the larger town and the smaller town. So what you find is people interested in responding to similar kind of things. And instead of thinking of India as these blocks, which are high consumption intensity and low consumption intensity, one has to completely rethink, I think, the model if one has to make sense of India. Otherwise, what one will be left with is to me, this is a facile debate. It's actually a banal debate to keep talking about India and Bharat, because both terms, I think, in today's context are meaningless.
Okay. Let me take it to you, Girish, as somebody who runs Dainik Bhaskar and has a worldview on this particular topic. Do you agree with Santosh that this is an irrelevant discussion to make that demarcation between India and Bharat?
Okay, let me start with saying that when we say India and Bharat, to some of you sitting here must be thinking about Bharat of a village, a guy in a half-torn clothes and all that, correct? So we are not talking about that kind of Bharat. Please understand the definition of rural in India as per the Government of India census is of a village which is population of less than 5,000, where 75% of the male has to be engaged in the agriculture pursuit. Then you qualify to become a rural village. Otherwise, you are anyway in urban. So I would like to actually say this blurring of Bharat and India is like a plane, like I'm morning this came from Bombay. So you have a business class and then you have economy class. So people, those who are sitting in business, they feel we are in India. And the people, those who are sitting in economy, the business class people feel they are Bharat. But you're forgetting that you are in the same plane, the same time taken to reach from Bombay to Delhi. But what happened, most of us, those who sit in the business class, tend to look at saying that, oh, that's Bharat. So I think we need to get ourselves right that there's no call Bharat and India. It's one market for marketers.
Yes, I was coming to you, Rajesh.
Yeah.
As you know, a leading marketer of the country, how are you looking at India and Bharat? And first, of course, before that, do you agree with the hypothesis that it is actually blurring? Tell me you have a contra view.
Yeah. I think it's an extremely important topic and an interesting topic, and everybody has a point of view on it, right? So I'll start with what is the conventional point of view, the notion around India and Bharat, like Santosh mentioned and Girish did, which is that India is all about, modernity, aspirational, urban, English speaking, and Bharat is all about, rural, so a large demographic divide and vernacular languages and so on and so forth, right? And there is also this theory that the lines are blurring and they're coming closer to each other because of, whatever else is happening around the world. I would like to actually take a slightly different view on it. And the way I see it is that, to me, India and Bharat, I would like to propose them as actually state of mind, right? I could have an India state of mind, which is all about saying, I'm forward-looking, I'm progressive, I'm modern in my thinking, I seek a certain kind of thing. And I could, at the same time, be in a Bharat state of mind, which is about saying, I am rooted in my tradition, I take comfort in the familiar, I love my culture, indeed I'm proud of my culture, and so on and so forth. And I think there is a little bit of, not a little bit, there is a fair bit of India and Bharat sitting inside each of us. And how it comes out, when it comes out, is a function of how we go on with our daily life. Let me just give you a simple example. If I were to take confectionery, I mean, that's the category where I work. If you take any of the formats, like a chewing gum, or a lollipop, or a jelly, they're all Western formats, right? I mean, they're not Indian formats in that sense. They came from outside of India. So, in a sense, chewing gum is seen as progressive, modern, and so on and so forth. But the flavors that go on it are kacha aam, and, chatpata mango, and spicy guava, which is all extremely desi, extremely something which I'm familiar with and I love, right? So there is a very sweet coincidence and a coexistence of both of them in a thing which then provides the consumer an experience that he or she desires, right? So I would like to just leave the thought saying India, Bharat are both a state of mind, and they all both exist within each of us, and they come out in different manifestations at different points in time.
Okay, before I come to this side of the panel, just to understand if the audience is with us or not, can I have a show of hands with, telling me that the number of people who actually agree that there are actually blurring lines between India and Bharat? Show of hands, please. Okay. And the number of people don't agree. They think it's actually two different planets. Okay, we have a mixed house, but I think more leaning towards the blurring. Okay, now let me come to this side of the panel, and I'll start with you. Do you agree with it? Do you think we are one country now, homogeneous country?
No, broadly, I was happy to see some hands, coming up when they said they did not agree. Exactly. So I'll try to look at it from 2 or 3 points of views, and I will be looking at it from the marketing point of view. And the first time when we heard about this subject, the blurring lines, the thought which came to mind was a marketing myopia way back in 1960 when Theodore Levitt wrote an article in Harvard Business Review. Now, you see, when you talk about that, he talked about don't please look inward, look out to the consumer at large. That's what he basically talked about. So he said, don't be product oriented, become consumer oriented. That's what he said. We all know that market is a set of consumers. And if you are dealing with a set of consumers, each consumer is different from the other. So therefore, to say and paint them all with one brush, to my mind is not correct, because otherwise we are saying that there is no need for marketing people to know who the consumer is. The consumer is different. There has been segmentation. Yes, the methods of segmentation are changing. But if you look at it from the individual point of view, each consumer has to have his own tastes and preferences, and marketeers like us are in the process of aggregating and mass customizing a product which is like way off. That's what we do in marketing. We know that the tastes and preferences are different, whether you are in Bharat, whether you are in India. but we try to create a product which caters to both. Or we try to create a product which caters to one niche. Now, if I take this to a society level, then if I look at it from the lens of Derrida, a famous literature, who said that there has to be a structure and there has to be a center of the structure. And I go back to the partition of this country in 1947, where I see that the center of the structure changed in 1947. India became enshrined in the constitution of this country. Bharat, on the other hand, is a notion which has been very old. However, the policy framers and the leaders of that time looked at industrialization. They did not look at agriculture. They promoted industry through the Industrial Development Act, and then the resolution passed. So the paradigm which came was that industry has to be promoted and agriculture has to be subsidized. So this divide of India and Bharat is by design. It is not existing. We designed it so. We called India by enshrining it in the constitution. We said that we want to be like the British, and we were coming out from colonialism. Therefore, that impression was always, we carried it forward. We said that we are now free. There is an episteme shift, and therefore we will shift to a new India, which is free India, and we'll start thinking differently. So that is so therefore the challenge before the marketeer is very clear, that you are dealing with two sets of customers, one in Bharat, the other in India, or they can be interchanged. You know, the behaviors are changing all the time. In the morning you can behave like an Indian, and the example which came with the business class and the economy class is very clear, that in the morning you can behave differently, in the evening you can behave differently.
Mr. Sharma, so basically,
Yeah, sure.
the longer the short of it is, you're saying it pretty much exists.
Exactly.
There are two worlds, and they're not blurring, and they both have to be targeted differently.
Different segments, different targeting. Yeah.
Fair point. So we'll debate that in a bit. But before that, let me go to Gautam, who heads our internet business. Do you agree with the prognosis?
So let me try and give you three answers to this. The crux is in the definition as to what is India and what is Bharat. So you can look at three types of divide. One is the economic divide, the other is the digital divide, and the third is the geographical divide, which we are talking about, urban cities and rural cities. Each one has different definitions of blurring, and within them, they have different definitions in different dimensions. So let's start with the geographical divide. The lines are blurring. So if I have to throw some data, the sale that Amazon does, for one day, 80% of the sale come from tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4, 5 cities. That's a very powerful data. It's not the urban which is dominating the e-commerce sales, right? If you look at the aspirations of cities like Lucknow and Jaipur and students there, what they have access to in terms of education, it's the same what they have in larger cities or metros. In fact, it's the same what they have in the Western countries. Today I can do a class in Stanford sitting in Patna, and that's the power, that's where the lines are getting blurred. Because in terms of aspirations, the moment I have exposure, the lines get blurred because my aspirations continue to increase. So if you go back 10 years or 15 years ago, the West was, say, 5 years ahead of what we are calling as India. Today they are just minutes ahead. Something happens in New York, India comes to know about it. It's just a matter of minutes. So it's not just India and Bharat which is blurring. It's also the West and India which is blurring in a particular fashion. And that's the power of information and infrastructure which is improving all over the country. So the power and role of media in those elements. Now let's take the socio-economic divide, which is important, where the nature of things that gets consumed in different markets is slightly different. The urban, or as it was defined as the top 50 million, the consumption pattern might be different. If you look at an English newspaper, broadly the advertisers are looking at metro markets or larger city markets. If you look at language media properties, the advertisers are looking at a much wider broad base there. So certain FMCG consumption, not just in terms of volume, is dominating in tier 2, tier 3 markets, not just in volume, but also in value. But it may not be true for luxury items. Luxury items does get consumed in tier 2 and tier 3 markets, but may not be at the same level of volume. So you have to look at it from a segmented perspective. And the last point, which is the digital divide, is probably the most interesting for me. Today, if you look at English users on the internet, there would be about 220 million. Hindi users are about 400 plus million. But what we have to appreciate and approach is the next billion users that's going to come into the fold. And that's where the divide has, and the products and the services that get built needs to cater to that kind of audience to bring into the mainstream. I'll stop here.
Fair point. Let me come to, a very, very different panelist that I have. He's a scriptwriter, one of India's most renowned scriptwriters. So Anand, give me your point of view. I mean, let's talk about content, right? We're living in this world of, where content has been digitally revolutionized, and people like me and large parts of the audience are very grateful that now we have so much of eclectic content at our disposal. And we're not stuck with, let's say, the age-old Saas and Bahu serials, which was a staple of this country for a long time. Having said that, are you saying even in content consumption, are you seeing a blurring of lines? Do you see the content that, say, let's say, a user who is paying for the service, whether it be a Netflix, let it be an Amazon Prime, or even a Hotstar, the paid model, would be the same kind of consuming class, which is broadly also consuming digitally, but mostly the free model or the advertiser video on demand model?
Good morning. I'll answer that. Before going to that, I need 2 minutes because I'm not a brand marketer, or I'm not a professional on this. I'm a storyteller. So I'll coming to your question, give me 2-3 minutes. I want to ask to the audience, which is the biggest Indian brand? Tata, a lot of names are asked. Modi. Okay, I'll frame the question a bit different. Which is the oldest Indian brand? See, all of us are talking about companies, all of us are talking about corporates. I told a storyteller is asking the question. Ramayan. Who said Ramayan? Ramayan is the greatest enduring global brand from India. Last 2-3 weeks before, there was an international Ramayana festival in Mumbai, in which I was one of the brand ambassadors. I have written a lot of, my first book was in Ramayana, Ravan's Ramayan, then I had written exclusive serials before doing Bahubali. What I found, it's a very interesting thing. One was from Philippines. Philippines is a Catholic country. The Ramayana performance is 1,000 years old. It had come from Philippines. Another one was from Indonesia, a Muslim country. Almost 700-year-old Ramayana, the ballet. Another one was from Cambodia, a Buddhist country. Here is a brand which originated in rural India many thousand years ago. Some may feel uncomfortable, but I am telling it as a brand itself. Why, I'll tell you. Originated somewhere in rural India, and it spread across the world. Who spread it across? Those are us urban Indian people did it. Nagarikas, in what they call in Sanskrit. It is not the citizen of Hindi. In Sanskrit, it is a sophisticated man who live in cities, what we call as India now. They spread it across the world. They took a rural story sung by the rural folk tail people, spread it across the world. When the trade went, it went through the trade ships. And when it went there, you talk about localization in branding, if I am not right. Global local brand. What was that Ramayana did? In Philippines Ramayana, Sita is the daughter of Ravan. It's like an opera because they have a very Spanish taste. Spain had ruled it. Even in India, the Ramayana changed as per the locality where it went. So what essentially is happening here, I am coming to this thing about Netflix and all through this question. Story was taken, there was a core story, a brand. It changed as per the need and time and the place, but retained its essential of the story. Whether any brand managers or marketers have got anything to learn from it, it is up to you to take. Coming back to the present day, it is not India needs Bharat. India needs Bharat for marketing. Many of you think it's a big market out there, how to tackle it. Whereas what we are seeing is Bharat has already started using India in a big way. For example, books. I come from the books world, which are the highest selling books nowadays, in which it is mythology written in English. Bharat using India for a global reach. Just like Ramayana, the patterns are coming again. Or Mahabharata, or any mythology. You are using a very local content, like Bahubali, seeped in Indian ethos. Use a medium like film and take it across the globe. So it is Bharat which is waiting to be utilized. Take the other kind of fictions like what Chetan Bhagat writes. What he does is he is catering to Bharat using India's language, and the lines are blurring. So as long as the moment you give half a chance to Bharat, it will take over the world. So it should not be the other way around. How to take your India to Bharat. It should be how to use the tools of India to take Bharat, because Bharat has proved again and again, taking across like China. We colonized China for 1,000 years by taking, without even sending a single man. I had written an article about it last week in Indian Express. Without taking a single man out, a single soldier out of India, without using a weapon, because it is the flow of ideas which went. It went from rural Bharat, used the tools of urban India or Nagariks of those days and conquered the world. If we can achieve that, then the future is ours. That's all I will say.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you.
So, Santosh, let me come back to you. We've had like, diverse sets of views here on this panel. Some of them questionable, some of them all right. If one had to, let's say, look at the India and Bharat as two different countries who are now merging and becoming one homogeneous market, I'd like to ask you, do you think this actually, and let's take that as true for a moment, do you think it's because Bharat is inching towards India, or is India inching towards Bharat? Where is that intersection really happening?
I think it's our mental barriers that are dissolving. I think more than actually the fact that the two are kind of moving. I think what we have constructed this, right? We have used these labels. India and Bharat are labels that we have chosen to use. Taking a very complex reality, we want to make sense of it. So we use these two simple labels to try and make sense of it, right? But this is not corresponding to reality. I mean, the fact is that, there are so many different layers that live together that I think the fact that we are being forced to re-examine this, right? We are being forced. I think it's a very powerful kind of an example that Anand just gave, which is just telling us that if we were to just not use these terms, we would find that actually it's hybridity. I think India, you will always find an enormous hybridity in what we do. We mix and match everything, right? So nothing is adopted in its pure form. Anything, even if you take anything from the West, and you will, in a variety of ways, we will find a way to make it ours by Indianizing it. I think similarly, this idea of these two different kind of markets with two very different worldviews, India thinks of India is much more Bharat than it thinks, and in using this frame, and Bharat is much more India than we think. It has always been the case. It's just that thanks to technology and thanks to more visible consumption, we are able to now acknowledge this. We are able to acknowledge the fact that, see, it's a very strange thing. The fact that it's constructed, you go to any other country, when you have these ads that have a collage of images that is showing a wide cross-section of consumers. In almost any country, you will see that the urban and the rural will coexist. So if you're showing a wide cross-section of people, you will include everybody in it. In India, there is rural marketing. It's separate. This is a different, we have constructed this as a different country, right? That this is rural, there are different people, they have to be understood differently, spoken to differently. This is a construction. That is not to say differences don't exist, but simply when you try and freeze these differences in such crude terms, what you get is, so the point I'm making is that yes, there is a shift that has taken place, true, but the bigger shift that is taking place is in our mindsets.
Okay, let me question that. Rajesh, do you agree with that, that this is a forced creation, and actually, let's say, as marketers, it's not required. In fact, do you think it sets you behind because you're looking at these different markets with preconceived notions, or do you think it's required because that's how you can cater to them in a manner that is more effective?
Right. No, I think a couple of people alluded to it, and I think it's a very simplistic way of looking at it and saying there is India and there is Bharat, and it was probably the genesis, if you go to it, was created for a certain reason, and to me, that reason today absolutely doesn't exist, right? So it is about, is there going back to what I was saying earlier, is there is an India in us which wants us to become progressive, aspirational, etc. There is also something in us which is, keeping us grounded, steeped to our, culture, tradition, and so on and so forth. And again, I'll just give another interesting, example if you were to look at it. I spoke about confectionery, which one might argue is a very, peripheral category. But if I take something as serious as, say, getting married, right, and marriage as an institution, right? In India, or in Bharat, sorry, if you look at it, it's all about probably arranged marriage. There is a certain way in which marriage is sort of solemnized and conducted, and that's how it has been. But if you take an India outlook to it, it's all about progressive, forward-looking, thinking, aspirationally, etc., where you meet somebody, you like that person, you fall in love and get married. And if you look at some of the sites that are there today, whether it's a Shadi.com or a Bharat Matrimony or any of those sites, what happens there is a very happy coincidence or a coexistence of both of them, where actually parents go look there for prospective brides or grooms, and they find somebody, then the whole thing gets formalized, and there is a semi-arranged marriage that happens, back to Santosh's point on this hybridization, right? So I think it's about how, it's a state of mind in terms of how you look at it and where you come from, as opposed to saying, this is how this part is and this is how this part is, and you need to treat them differently.
So how have you changed in the sense, let's say as a company, as a marketer, how have you changed in terms of how you're dealing with things?
So if you look at it from a marketeer's point of view, I would say three things, right? One is, at the end of the day, the consumer, irrespective of India or Bharat, is seeking a certain kind of experience. Am I able to offer that experience to that consumer in a meaningful way or not? Number one. Number two, I need to communicate my proposition to them in a way which is rooted on an insight, which is a cultural insight, right? So chocolates is an alien category. But when I communicate chocolate to the consumer, I say, kuch meeta ho jaye. Why? Because there is a tradition which says that I consume something sweet when there is good news, right? So an alien format, but communicated to the consumer in a meaningful insight rooted on tradition. And the third one is about end of the day, whether you are Ghatkopar or Worli to Girish's point, value matters, right? So I have to provide the right value proposition to the consumer. So as a marketer, for me, right product experience, meaningful communication rooted on cultural insights, and the right value proposition is what matters.
But Rajesh, those were the same rules even earlier.
So nothing's changed as far as the rules are concerned.
Yeah.
It's about how you approach it when it comes to the consumer, right? That's what changes.
Okay, why don't you take this point forward, as you seem to be in agreement with him. My point is, if you're actually saying that the lines are blurring. How are you using the blurring lines in the way that you are approaching your consumers? You do not have a differentiated strategy anymore. Is it a one strategy fits all?
So see what happens, you have to look at consumer in different buckets. You can say, okay, this is one consumer who's very elite for me. This is one consumer who is a mass consumer for me. But you can't put them on a different pedestal in terms of importance. What mistake most of the marketer does, when they make these buckets of consumer in a